let's go to the next question, which is around probably, I'm going to jump a little bit, but what are the key responsibilities, when we as creators creating such AI apps to design these ethical and inclusive experiences from AI, because we're almost touching the realms of that conversation. So what is your perspective on that, Barry?
Well, I mean, in my world, which is a lot about design and sort of like creating new digital products and creating new digital experiences, there's a lot of concern around the ethics of AI. So these giant LLMs that are creating many of these things that you might think of as original are not. They're actually, what they're doing is they are borrowing pieces of existing art or existing writing from actual people who created these things at one point. And they are kind of doing some predictive modeling and putting them, sort of reassembling them into something. So we can have a gigantic discussion around at what point does sort of existing art get translated enough to become original art, which is a question that I can't really answer. Yeah. But there's a lot of concern, certainly in this world, around the ethics of attribution and sort of like making sure if you're making a profit off of something that's quote unquote generated, that maybe some of the original creators that created the stuff that sort of inspired that new creation are getting credit and or something. And so like we think a lot about like the power of blockchain and some of these other things to actually be able to trace ownership to some degree. In the world of coaching, I would argue that there's the thing that sort of translates over to that, to me, a little bit is curriculum, right? And some of the proprietary sort of like programs. And so I would want to make sure that to the degree it's possible, you kind of recognize that you are not just sort of like interacting with something that's being created out of thin air, that it's leaning on sort of like a proprietary curriculum that has been created over time through a lot of probably human effort and a lot of sort of like intellectual curiosity, and that maybe the way that it's being articulated is sort of being generated in real time, but we have to figure out how to attribute things back to that original curriculum. The other thing that I think a lot about just is kind of still around accessibility. So in the same way that I'm excited about what these generative AI tools can do in terms of scaling what used to be, frankly, a very elitist kind of like service that only execs would get, I think we still have to recognize that there's a gigantic population that maybe might not be served by some of these tools in their current form. And so I like the idea of sort of like always thinking about how can we push to make this accessible, not a scary thing, usable by all kinds of people, the widest possible audience. Like, are there barriers around like the interface that maybe we can sort of like reduce to make it easier to use? Are there special considerations for people where English is not a first language? Or are there special considerations for people that have maybe an impairment? And so like those are the things that I would argue you need to be thinking about. You need to look back behind you and go like, am I sort of crediting some of the originators that came up with the content that this new system is learning from to produce these new services? And then looking forward, am I really serving the widest possible audience? Like, I think it's awesome that you've expanded it to everyone at this larger democratic scale, but is there more that we can do to sort of open it up to an even wider audience?
Yeah. I love a design officer's perspective on this question, honestly.
Yeah.
I've been speaking to so many HR leaders, L&D leaders. This perspective on privacy is very, very different. On security is very different. I think they, rightly so, they're also concerned about where's the data going? How are we going to ensure that it's going to be used for what? It will be used for, training for various reasons, anonymized data, but where all it's going. So we've gone through multiple technology audits, multiple AI risk audits now in last 1 year.
Yeah.
We've become champs in that. But we've been looking at it from, I remember one of the pieces which we've been working on is that have we made Sherlock for people who are colorblind? That was a very new view to us, a few months back when we were like, wow, we never thought about that.
Yeah.
And that was learning from one of the clients. I was like, that's fantastic. And that's something, like you said, accessible, right? Those aspects also count in. So it's a very design view on this, and I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah. I think this isn't a unique challenge to just, these coaching tools. This is a challenge really to any interactive experience. I think we are very quick to sort of like pat ourselves on the back for like, look at this amazing tool that we've made that, millions of people can now use, without kind of maybe taking a moment to recognize there's still millions of people who can't. And so like, I just think that the sort of like constant push to expand accessibility on some of the tools that we're making is frankly good from a business perspective. You get the widest possible audience that can kind of use your services or products or tools. But it also, I think, it's really important kind of from a mission standpoint, right? The mission, I would argue, of a lot of these tools is to give everyone, to sort of democratize like, really advanced opportunity to, improve who you are as a leader, improve who you are as a person. And so like if the mission is to sort of like no longer just let this exist only in the executive suite, to really expand it to everyone, then you got to really take that to heart, and you got to embrace what everyone means, because everyone does not look like or sound like or be able to sort of like move around like what you and I can. It's different.